recording. Anyway, but yeah, she gives you a whole lot in terms of context and sort of understanding who these folks were and what was happening as well. And then the second half of the book, she kind of starts looking at issues like, press accountability, accountability of, law enforcement, states attorneys' offices, and looking at, well, what would, something like, a TRC or something like that, look like for lynching, And again, she wrote that article, I think, back in 2003, kind of looking specifically at what would that look like. But she does bring that back in, the latter part of On the Courthouse Lawn. It's a phenomenal, phenomenal book. It's not an easy read, but none of this stuff is easy. So,
Or well, and so thank you for that. And we knew immediately that we had to get a copy of it. One of the things, so what you've received so far is the just kind of template of the case studies, and then we intend to wrap around. I think we're going to do it by the same regions that you all have already set up. So Western, Central, the Southern, and Eastern Shore. I think they're just the four regions. And then offer some contextual information around each of those. Well, so each county, where we can find it, as a lead into the case studies in that county, and then contextual work for the region to the, so in terms of employment and blah, 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 whatever. So that it's not going to replicate her book at all, and that's not the intention ever, but that it'll have some juice to it. But we wanted the case studies, the instructions we got, where the case study should be as factual, as possible, just in and of themselves. They can stand alone, and then the rest of it is
yeah.
like.
Yeah.
And
And in terms, oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, finish.
Okay. I was going to say, because in terms of, looking for sort of more county specific kinds of things, I know Heritage Associates in their profiles,
Mhm.
they also included just some, general basic information about, the counties and what were happening at the time, before they go into the specifics of the
Mhm.
of the case. So that might be a good place to start, for those spots off the Eastern Shore that Sherilyn Eiffel is talking about. But you might be able to start putting together some of that more localized information, sort of going through those profiles.
Right.
And can I download just a couple more thoughts I have about the report that I started thinking of during the hearing? One, Brett Tyler's testimony, who is the head of Heritage Associates, he testified in the last panel on the second day. He was the last person to testify at the hearing. Um, and if you're familiar, I think you're familiar with what Heritage Associates their role has been through this process. They've been doing the genealogical research on the people who were lynched and their descendants. And so his testimony, I thought, did a really nice overview of who was impacted by lynchings, the circumstances. It just had a really nice breath to it. And I thought it could be a good intro to the factual synopsis section. I mean, I'm sure you want to work with it and tweak it, but I just thought a lot of the ways that he framed his findings could be a way to introduce the facts with starting broad before going narrow. Similarly, when you introduce the case study section, I think it's really important to emphasize what we don't know and how this is at a minimum what we do know. But there may be many more people that were lynched. We know for certain there were many more attempted lynchings. And so just kind of emphasizing that this isn't the full extent of the impact, but this is, just what we were able to ascertain. A third thing is I thought it would be really interesting um, to introduce each section of the report with some piece of art, uh, uh, like the poem that Carol Boston Weatherford read that she said she couldn't get published, the poem on lynching, maybe the lyrics to Strange Fruit. And there was another poem that Carol Boston Weatherford read. I can't remember Oh, was it James Weldon Johnson, or was it I think it might have been it was James Weldon Johnson. Yeah. It was a poem on lynching. And so just thinking that might be a way to humanize and bring in the storytelling aspect of the report, is to kind of have some type of poem, or show the way that lynching impacted people almost contemporarily, so it's so we feel it more. So those are just some thoughts.
No, so thank you, Michelle. That's a great idea. One issue has to do with, well, first of all, is that something you're asking us to do? That's the first thing. And then if you are, then there are questions about getting permissions. And sometimes you have to pay for permissions if it's, something that's still under copyright or whatever. And so what advice would you have about that? If that's something you're asking us to do?
Well, if it's the ones I mentioned, I want to say, what is copyright? It's 100. How many years? Do you know, Stephanie? Doesn't even know that. I can look it up. It's a certain amount of years, and I'm pretty sure that the James Weldon poem, that's outside of copyright.
That should be in public domain.
That's public domain.
I was also just thinking something, like, why am I blanking on the author? But, If We Must Die, again.
Claude McKay. It's Claude McKay.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I thought about that as
Yeah.
well. Right.
I mean, which would be another great one, but yeah, that would be in public domain as well.
Exactly. And Strange Fruit is likely in public domain.
Exactly.
As well. And then the other one is Carol, and we could ask her if she would give us permission, because she said she was never able to get it published. So she might be happy to give us the rights to basically publish her poem. We could ask her.
That's true. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So just
so again, is that something that you're asking us to do?
When you say to do, do you mean to identify which poems to use? What do you mean by to do?
Well, all of the above, to identify, and then if we need to pursue permissions to do that piece, and then
I mean, I'm speaking as myself right now, so I don't want you to feel like I'm giving anybody orders. I just wanted to throw these ideas out there as something I was thinking about during the hearing. But yeah, I mean, like we could look into the years, make sure it's outside of public domain, and we could collectively make the decision of which poem, which lyrics we think should go where. Go ahead, Amy.
Yeah, I mean, I think Dr. View, your question is really important. My 2 cents would be that your focus right now is on the content. I mean, that you have your hands full just getting through the data that has been generated for 5 years. I mean, that would be my 2 cents, is that was the original agreement, I believe, with you all. And so if there is something additional, such as securing copyright privileges, etc., then maybe that's worked on the side by somebody magical, and then we can add it in. Notice my hand's not raised for that one. I lowered my hand.
You know better than to raise your hand for something.
Anyway, that'd be my 2 cents, is like, stay true to the path that you're on, and then let's make this list of really creative generative ideas, and whether or not Commissioner Coles can pick it up or somebody else in that field, then we can do that.
I mean, just off the top of my head, that just harkens back to Dr. Du Bois's Souls of Black Folk, which he started with an epigraph, of something, including the musical notation from the various spirituals. Every chapter he started that off, and so I think
Love it.
something like that might hearken to that. And I think picking up on what you had said earlier, Michelle, about again, because we don't know everything, or I don't know if that was Amy. My brain is kind of fried right now. But I finally, it's like, got a from the library copy of Pauli Murray's State Laws on Race and Color, and had epic technology fail, trying to get it out to folks. But one of the things that she said is, it's like, this is, sort of, state level laws, there's so much more that's happening at the local and county levels, and we don't know all of this. So this is not comprehensive. And so I think we need to think about, where are those gaps? How do we try to fill them?
And acknowledge them.
Yeah. Yeah. And just say, we're, there are going to be things that, we just don't have. And again, we frequently say, it's like, these are the, known, or documented racial terror lynchings. There are probably others that happened, but we just don't have that information, and that's where I think, the case of Edna Broughton, I think, becomes a really interesting one because, and again, I went back and watched the Somerset hearing to refresh myself on that, and I forgot just how powerful and how painful that particular hearing was. But yeah, I think that's something where, it's like, again, if, was this a lynching? I mean, because there were three people in the car, or was this just an unfortunate hit and run, accident? And I think that, we could take it either way. And, some folks are already weighing in, which is fine. But I think, it's a conversation we're going to need to have.
Mhm. Yes, thank you, commissioners. Really appreciate that. I wanted to introduce myself as well. I'm Leah Danville. I'm one of the other report writers. It was a pleasure meeting so many of you last weekend. It was very powerful. I didn't know we were going to jump right into like report stuff, but I think these are great ideas. Commissioner Coles, we fully understand that this report is our lift. And so I think that's a great idea. That my mind probably would have gone to that anyway, in terms of having some way of introducing each section. But yeah, just wanted to like quickly introduce ourselves. I think it would be great for us to, because I don't know if this meeting today is fully about the report, so I don't want to take up too much of you all's time, seeing that we're already 22 minutes in. But it would be great to pick up some of this stuff during a follow-up meeting.
Yeah.
A pleasure to see you all again.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I didn't set a specific agenda because I figured, just unpacking from the hearing and then thinking with an eye towards, how do we start translating all of this into useful material for Janice and Leah to work with. Because that's what's between us and the finish line right now.
Yeah. And we became very much aware of that.
Yeah, so you know what, can I ask, like, I know we're going through these recommendations and it is a lot to unpack. So are we looking at each of those, and I love the way you set that up, Commissioner Coles, like each of these kind of panels, are we looking at those being kind of subject areas and us recommending under each of those subject areas, maybe 3 to 5 recommendations? I'm just trying to think, because there's so much, right? But the way the day was organized and the recommendations that was given, I thought that could be a real clean way for legislators to be able to pick up pretty quickly. Just a thought.
It's a great suggestion.
Absolutely. I was just thinking, yeah, I mean, since again, you and the interns did such a great job and so much work in terms of organizing it and arranging, structuring it that way, I think it
Right.
might make sense to, yeah, use that structure and
Mhm.
build the recommendations that we make, around that. So yeah, it's okay. So for law enforcement and policing, here's, some of the things that were said, some of the highlights from whatever, and here are the concrete recommendations and the rationale for each recommendation that we have, because I think somebody's, one of them said, that we need to have sort of a complete harms report or something like that. And I figured, well, there's part one, there's the harms report to kind of talk about, here are the harms that we've experienced, and now based on that full accounting, here based on these various, these, I guess, what was it, 7 broad areas, then we can say, these are the things that various, experts have recommended and, that we've, yeah, and just sort of use those as sort of the main headings for for the second part of the hearing of the
Yeah,
report.
and because Doctors View and Danville have, they have a lot to digest, it may help them too,
Mhm.
because you got a big lift, as you know. It may help them. to distill some of that information in
Mhm.
that way.
There's a couple of areas that weren't included in the hearing because witnesses weren't available that I know we wouldn't forget about, like education. That wasn't really squarely addressed, and possibly curriculum changes. But we did receive a written testimony. I believe it's from Gloria Ladson Billing on that topic.
Oh,
And so
good.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, great.
So we have written testimony from people that weren't able to participate as well. So that will also be filling out some of our recommendations.
And I don't know where this would kind of fall, but I know that you all have been gracious in giving us more time to submit written testimony, because from a kind of child and youth perspective, I wanted to submit something from my firm in terms of how these lynchings of children and even some of their parents have affected the permeation of kids and families being not only broken, but kids going into a really brutal child welfare system, particularly during that time and going into colored orphan asylums. So I think that giving us that extra time, I don't know where it would fall. Maybe it's more of the community impact, but there was definitely a family impact beyond what was actually testified to on the panel.
Yeah. And if you could encourage Yvette to, I don't think we've gotten written testimony from her yet. So just reminder, Janice and Leah, kind of knowing that you guys are really consumed right now with the individual case studies, I've told the experts, they have a little more time to give us their reports. And I've kind of been suggesting late April, early May. It might even be later than that before you're able to turn to it, but I've just given people a couple more weeks if they need it.
Thank you. And that's fine. I mean, if they're going into a folder somewhere, then that's just point us to the folder and
Yeah.
we'll pick it up. Because honestly, yes, we're digging deeply into each case study, and also we're aware, when we come across information, we're saying, oh, this goes in the overview. So we're pulling it out and putting there. Oh, this goes into the recommendations piece. So we already have a running list of those kinds of things. We're not just so narrowly focused on the case studies that we're ignoring that piece. So it's fine to do that and to let us know when the stuff is there so that we can start to access it and make those kinds of parallels. So yeah.
Okay. And I sent you guys the link to that, I think either earlier this week or last week, but I sent you the link to the folder where I've been storing all the expert testimony that we've received. It's in the same link that Michelle Garrick put all of the Loyola analysis that she did on the case studies, or on the individual lynchings.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, received.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Michelle.
And then picking up on education, I know several of the experts did talk about saying that that we need to make sure that we get this, and several of it's like myself included, said yes, we need to talk about getting this into the school curricula. And again, somebody also mentioned sort of making sure that we get this into the police academies as well.
I was thinking when you said that.
Yes. Yes. So yeah, I mean, even though it wasn't, its own subject panel, I think, there was, a recognition of it. And again, if we need to pull that out and say, yep, education has its own separate subheading, we can do that too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking too that, like you said, education, but it could be kind of like, other connected issues or something, naming something that may not be directly in those spaces, but connects to the larger composition of what we're trying to convey to the legislature.
Oh, this is great. And Eric, thank you for dropping the link in the chat. Yeah, that will be another useful piece. So yeah,
Yeah, I'm cognizant of adding yet another thing to the list of things to read, but I think it's structured in a pretty straightforward way that you could drop into particular sections of the report that might be helpful for reflection rather than reading the entire thing.
Okay, great. Other thoughts and ideas? You know, because, and again, I don't know if folks have had a chance to look at the, you know, the preliminary case studies that Janice and Leah shared with us, you know, that again, Eric, I need to make sure I get that forwarded to you. Yeah, and then JP, I'll make sure to get that to you as well. But yeah, I think this is, you know, again, good conversation, trying to figure out, you know, how do we translate all of this into usable data that can then be incorporated into the final report. Yeah, because I think all told, we had about what, maybe 14, 15 hours of.
It's a lot. And you know, I wanted to ask you all this too. I know there's going to be this huge report that's going to go to the legislature, but we also know policymakers are not going to read all of it, some of them, right? Most people won't. Like, will there be like an executive summary of maybe a couple of pages where we do the highlights? So like, these are the recommendations. And I know we'll have like a recommendation and a justification. They may not even read all of that, like distilling that to something that's very clean, something that they can just lift and grab pretty quickly with a reference to the larger document where they can do more detailed reading. I'm just thinking about policymakers and how they like to move, and they're not going to want to do a lot of reading, so it might make it easy for them.
Definitely. And it's great because my mom and I both have backgrounds in policy writing. And so not only that, but in education. And so our main goal for this report is to make it as bulletproof as possible, to make it so that it not only is laying out the facts, but it is offering recommendations that it's very hard to say, oh, well, why should we do this? We should do this because XYZ, because there's sources that say this, that they're experts that have said this. And so that is our goal, is to not only make this as readable as possible, but as accessible as possible and as humanizing as possible. And so that's a part of the huge lift. Not only is sifting through all of the information, but is to really ensure that everyone from a school student to a policymaker can pick this up and gain something from it that can move action forward.
And I would just add actionable to your point, Stephanie. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I think Stephanie's point is so important in that for a lot of commissions that I've seen in other places, they have so much, there's such a richness of information that they have, and so there's such a temptation to just dump it all in the report, and it just becomes overwhelming, not only for policymakers but just your average person to try to, you know, wade through that. And so to be able to distill kind of key ideas, it will really help with that engagement, not only by policymakers but other segments of the public as well.
So other thoughts, other ideas? I mean, aside from saying, Janice and Leah, however we can help you, you know, we certainly want to do that. Just because, yeah, it's a lot. Yeah, and as I said, I will get you my comments in writing, and I, you know, was also just sort of looking at a couple of other things that I had sort of done some preliminary writing on some of these, just, and I'll send those along with you just so you can have a look at them as well. Because again, I'm just thinking, you know, the one thing that, you know, I was a little curious about was, you know, just trying to put something of a counter narrative together, because, you know, the narratives that come out of the Baltimore Sun and the, you know, the contemporary newspapers, you know, again, they're very much playing into what, you know, my students and I called, you know, the brute Negro narrative. So it's like, okay, how do we craft a counter narrative so that, you know, again, we're humanizing them, you know, and sort of reclaiming their humanity. These were people, you know, who were family members, you know, who were community members, who had people who loved them, you know, or, you know, in the one case of the person in Frederick, you know, who you know, he had a love letter that he was sending to, you know, was it his
Yes.
fiance? You know, it's like, but again, sort of, you know, to show that, you know, these weren't just, you know, bloodthirsty, you know, brutes who were trying to, you know, to take advantage of white women. Um, so yeah, I can, you know, I'll share that stuff with you when I type up my comments. But that was just sort of the one thing that sort of leapt out at me, you know, as I was reading all 7 of them. You know, which again, the proverbial hat off to you for getting those things done and getting them done as well and as quickly as you did. Um, you know, and I know there's more to do, but you know, I think you've got us off to a good start.
Mhm.
It
And
did-
I'm particularly interested in Doctor's View in Danville because I'm going through the case studies too. I really want to get into your links, right? So like you did a lot of tagging of like support. I really want to read into that because I'm wondering too, because when I think about like one of the case studies, I'm like, yeah, this is what this particular newspaper reported. But I'm sure that there's an understory or an opposite story of that, kind of looking at it from a discursive kind of standpoint in terms of how, you know, they're crafting this picture in these newspapers about who these people are and who their families are. But at the same time, it's coming from a myopic source,
Yeah.
like one way. So some of that, you know, fleshing that out. So I wanted to get into some of the supportive sites and things that you put in. I also want to say this, and this is just to a larger point, and I know we're discussing technicalities, but I really want to again give a big shout out to Commissioner Coles, Commissioner Creary, Commissioner Millen. That was an incredible 2 days.
Mhm.
And I want to thank everybody on here who like contributed to recommending the experts to testify. I don't know if it could have come together better. It was a completely embodied experience, and intellectual one, right? I should say even holistically that, I mean, I left reeling for days. And I just want to thank you all just for your leadership and the work that was put into pulling that together, because I know this is what Commissioner Creary wanted from the beginning. He wanted that, but he told me early on he wanted that to be a very powerful kind of ending to these public hearings. And I will say it met the challenge.
Mhm.
So I can't say that enough because it was a lot of work done, and I want you to hear again the appreciation of what it did for many.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. And here again, I will just again give credit where credit is due. Commissioners Coles and Millen and, you know, the team of interns that Commissioner Coles assembled, they did, I would say, about 98% of the heavy lifting, you know.
I hear you.
I was not kidding when I said, you know, this commission has benefited from the unpaid and underfunded labor of women. You know, and I am not gonna shy away from that. You know, I mean that's just the reality of it. Um, you know, so again, I will give you all, you know, the props that you deserve, and even then, it's probably not enough. So yes, thank you.
Well,
Yeah.
I just think it was a absolute privilege to be working with the commission that could produce something like that. You know, it's rare that those truths are told, that those stories are shared. And so it was an absolute privilege to be able to bring that to fruition. It was like watching a dream hop out of my head and take form. And it's like, I love every second of this. So thank you all for your
We could
contribution.
tell too, Commissioner, because you were smiling the whole time. I was giggling to myself.
I know. I'm like, I'm sitting here cheesing like the Cheshire cat talking about lynching. I'm so happy that we're in this space of truth and honesty. And so it was a privilege to take part in and help bring it to life.
No, it was phenomenal. And you all had just a room of heavy, heavy hitters. And it was for that to be our first hearings to go to, we feel really honored that we were able to be in that space and to hear those testimonies firsthand. All did a phenomenal, phenomenal job. And I just wanted to touch on a little bit of what Ms. Franklin mentioned, brought up about the sources. A lot of the times we just say we're trying to just say according to, because we are not trying to give too much truth to these one-sided narratives. For a lot of these lynchings, it is unfortunate that the Baltimore Sun is the only the only news source that has documented it. And so that's where kind of the background sections are going to become very, very important, laying that foundation. That section during the hearings about media was spot on. And so including some of those testimonies as well as just historical information about media sources during that time to lay the foundation of that background is going to be paramount to this report. Because within the case studies, we don't find that is the space. We don't think, and it's up to discussion because we're working on this together, but we don't think that's the space to fully have that discussion. But that groundwork definitely needs to be laid before heading into them. And then within those case studies, making sure that we're linking, that we're citing as much, and then just saying according to versus giving too much truth to the narratives that are presented.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's very important. Because, as you said, yeah, I mean, the Baltimore Sun was not interested in the least in terms of sharing any substantial information about, the people who were, the victims of these crimes. Again, they had to play out their, and again, you read these things, especially in the Sun. I mean, it's like, they had their template and they, sort of had their process that they had to do, it's like, which is why it's always interesting, when they say, when the black folk, it's like, we're not playing according to the script, it's like, okay, well, yeah, he didn't confess, he died game. Okay, he's not playing by the script that they want him to play. He's not doing this. He's maintaining his innocence. And so they have to at least account for that somehow. It's like, yeah. Which is why, and again, I think, Sherry Lynn Eiffel does a wonderful job of this, but sort of highlighting, how the Afro just went about covering, those events in such a different way, going out and actually talking to their families, I mean, this is how we knew, for example, that George Armwood's favorite song was His Eye is on the Sparrow. This is how we knew Matthew Williams carried two bank books, because, he lost money during the last economic depression, and, I think she also found, I think it was, the oral history saying that it was basically, his employer's son who shot him, because again, on the face of it, it makes no sense. Oh yeah, I'm going to shoot my employer because he didn't give me my money and then I'm going to shoot myself. What? Yeah, I mean, and so when you look at the Afro and sort of how they went about, again, how Clarence Williams, went and talked to folks, both black and white, to get a completely different narrative, to present these folks and to kind of say that, yeah, I mean, this is not, what the Sun and what the local papers, were. I mean, as I recall, heck, I mean, they, it's like was it the Armwood one or was it, no, it was Matthew Williams where, I mean, they just said, no, we're not even going to talk about, we're not even going to report about this, and so you want to talk about silencing. I mean, that was just you know, flagrant. It's like we're not even going to put out a narrative about this because, it's just, we just don't want to talk about it. So yeah, getting those counter narratives, or it's like setting the ground so that we can set up those counter narratives, I think is going to be tremendously important.
Yeah, the background pieces, and you're absolutely right. Dr. Danville, you're right about like doing the background pieces. And I understand what you're saying about the case studies. But one of the things I want to say in the case studies, and you did it with the Isaac Kemp, is you laid out the case studies where you're saying basically this is what the reporting had said in the sources that you looked at. However, there was like a line, and the line actually, to me, casted doubt on that single source providing information. Those are the types of things I do think need to go into case studies. So I recognize where you want to kind of stick a certain way, but just those one lines cast, okay, so this only came from one source, like with Isaac Kemp, it was like, yeah, but it was only the reporting of this one particular person. So we don't really basically know whether he did it or not, but you're not drawing that conclusion. You're just putting in, this is a counter narrative here. This is one source. And so if you do that, I think throughout these case studies in conjunction with the background kind of information, I think it allows people to start looking at the stories more critically.
1000%. And please mark those spaces where there are questions. Like, please tear this up. We want this to be
I've been digging. So it takes me a little bit of a minute. That's why I said I want to read your sources, because I do that type of digging a little bit.
Yeah, and then we just sent this over to them last week, and that was right before the hearings. And so we want this to be a solid representation of 5-6 years of work. And so yes, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, to put it in, sort of the academic historian's language, it's like, yeah, that would be part of the historiographical review, kind of looking at, here are the sources, here are, yes, these are the sources that we have, however limited they may be, and here are some of the problems or some of the issues with these particular sources, or, in this one particular case, where if this is the only source and this is why this single source is problematic, so can we take it at face value, right? I mean, that's what, we spend, that's, usually the first part of it, any book that we write is just kind of doing that introductory overview, kind of like, okay, here's what people have talked about. This is what we have available to study this. So yeah, I mean, I think we'll have to do something similar, to kind of say, yeah, we're talking about these case studies, but we got to take with at least a grain of salt, if not, a 50-kilo sack of salt. Some of these issues, we can't necessarily take at face value.
And I would just caution about using the phrase according to and then a source, because I think that can be heard or read two different ways. I think it sounds like you're saying it as according to, in quote, side eye, these people that are not very trustworthy. But I think if someone's just reading it, and that's often how you attribute a reputable source, to support your argument. According to the New York Times, 5% of people XYZ, right? And so it can read as if we're giving credibility to the source. And so I think it's really important to do the types of things Nick and Stephanie, I'm sorry, Stephanie, Nick and Stephanie are saying. I created a whole new name for you. It was like Stephanie. I don't know what I was saying, but to point out where those gaps and holes are, to show that you really can't trust the source, but it's the only source, so you are referring to it, but it's not a complete record. And maybe in the county level hearings, in the presentations that took place, the historical presentations, I would imagine that they probably did a good job. I know they did it at my county, the county hearing I helped organize, of filling in the full picture of the circumstances behind the lynching.
They did do it in that one out there,
Yeah,
in Charles County. Yeah.
No, I think most of them, they did a very good job of that, and again, just sort of going back over, Somerset and looking briefly at Wacomico, yeah. And again, I mean, that's where, you've got, Charles Chavis, it's like in his book, it's like, I mean, you can just pull all kinds of information out of there, in both of those. And so, yeah, I noticed, George Armwood wasn't in there because, again, the amount of material that Dr. Chavis presented at that hearing was just massive. I mean, that, you
We're
know,
kind of saving that one for last.
yeah, yeah, it makes sense to me. I would do the same. Yeah, he did not write small. Um, but no, hopefully this is helping to at least kind of figure out how to, set things up. And again, a lot of, I always think, this is kind of like, the chemical reaction, it's like 98% of a chemical reaction is like the energy of activation, kind of getting it all to the point that it actually happens. But then once it does, it moves. Not unlike the commission. It took us a while to kind of get up to speed, and it took us, what, the better part of 2 years before we had our first hearing. But once we got that process moving, things kind of moved along. So, um, yeah, I mean, again, let's make sure we take the time and we get it right.
I'm sorry, this may not be the space to ask this, but I do have a quick question. I noticed that Wish Shepherd is not listed as an official lynching victim, and I'm wondering if it's because he was quote hung legally, even though some of the information I'm coming across says that even though he was convicted and was set to be lynched, that his or not set to be hanged, that was kind of sped up due to this like mob mentality. And so I'm wondering if that would fit more in a near lynching sort of narrative. This may not be the place, but because I'm working on the Eastern Shore right now
Mm.
and those case studies, wanted to.
Yeah, and that's where I think Sherry Lynn Eiffel does talk about that case as well. But yeah, that would be one of those near lynchings, and again, subject for a whole nother commission. But let's talk about some of those legal lynchings. Where, okay, yes, lynchings have pretty much stopped. And that gap from 1911 to 1931, and it's like, yeah, I will bet my next paycheck that somebody got lynched during that period. But um, to kind of talk about, yeah, the rise in executions that go up sort of with that corresponding decrease in the number of extra legal lynchings. Yeah, that's a study that's just waiting to be done. And but yeah, I would say to your point, yeah, we don't include them because again, does it fit the criteria? And again, we're primarily using the NAACP, criteria. There has to be a body, it was actually, killed, you know, by at least three people in the name of, ostensibly justice or the race or whatever, that was. And I'm blanking on the fourth one. Um, but yeah, so again, I would think, and that's where again, I think, thinking about Edna Broughton, do we, does her case fit those criteria? And again, I think a case could be made. Similarly, I think, you could make a comparable case, not to include it. Um, but yeah, I don't know if that helps at all.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you.
Mhm.
And Nick, can you run through the three that you could remember? There's a body, there are three people
Yeah.
involved.
Yeah, because again, there's a body. So in other words, it's like it can't be, well, they tried to lynch him, but no, there has to be a body. Person has to have been murdered. It has to have been, done by, a mob, which they, I think, defined as three or more people to distinguish that from murder, as opposed to, it's like this is distinct. This is what makes lynching distinctive. Is that there's a mob, there's a community, involved in that, and it's done in the name of the race or justice or something along those lines, you know, so I mean there was sort of a real purpose to it. It wasn't just, you know, something that happened in the heat of passion or something like that. Yeah, I can try to pull that up as well and make sure I send you those. But yeah, those were the criteria that, you know, again, the NAACP and other organizations agreed upon. I think it was back in the 40s. You know, but yeah, those have sort of become sort of the standard criteria to identify or define a lynching as opposed to, you know, some other form of violent crime. Amy,
Thank
your hand's up.
Yeah, but in this case, there was a body, right? He was killed, and but so I think there are cases across the state where for one little fact or reason or another, it's not they're not actually falling within that the 38 known. But and there's one out in Howard County, I think it is, where it now it may be that it was I can't remember his name, but it's believed that it was a mob of Black individuals who lynched a Black man. So it falls outside the purview of this commission. But now there's a question being raised: was it a mob of white men in blackface? So that if so, now we have a 39th victim, right? So it's this, questionable, ambiguous lack of concrete information. And so I'm not if somebody is actually dead, it's not a near lynching, right? They have been murdered, but whether or not it meets all the criteria. So I think we need to come up with a term or a title for these, I don't know what the title is, but unclear something.
Yeah.
I think it's important to name it. I mean, these are other cases that have been researched and have been,
Yeah.
evaluated, assessed.
Thank you, Amy. And again, I didn't know if this is the right space to bring it up, but again, been working on these the past couple of days. He's considered the first legal execution in Caroline County.
Right. So it's
Right,
not extra.
Right,
It's
but
not
the
extrajudicial.
the, the narratives that I also were coming across said that he was supposed to be hanged quietly in a private area, and that a crowd was like, no, we want to see him hanging. And so then it was moved to a public space where people were in boats and having picnics, and it became this spectacle. And so that's why, where to me, because there were another case that I can't remember if it's Isaac Kemp, but that I worked on recently where he was sentenced to be executed as well, but then a mob actually like took matters into their own hand. This felt similar to me because the mob of people dictated how his justice was to come about. So
Yeah.
even if the court system did say, yes, you would die by hanging, a mob decided, no, this is going to be for our enjoyment of sorts. And so that's where this one felt a little different. And I like know where it would stay.
Yeah, and that actually gets to the criterion that I couldn't remember. It was that the person, you know, it's like, again, number one, there must be evidence a person was killed. In other words, there's a body. Number two, the person must have met their death illegally.
Okay.
And third, person must have been killed by a group of people, and it must have been under the pretext of serving justice, race, or tradition.
Right. And I think, Nick, you could help me. I don't know if it was Montgomery County. There was one county where there were other cases that were introduced that were not one of the 38, that such as the one you're mentioning, Leah, that certainly helped to elevate that fear, right? So whether or not it was a legal lynching, legal murder, but because of that context that you just described, it just, it inflames it on both sides, the fear and then that power. And so it acts like a lynching. My point is, I think some of this stuff should be included, but I'm just not quite sure how to sort of categorize it. I mean, I think it's part of the story.
Right.
Yeah.
So when Lee and I talked about this, we definitely wanted to bring it before the group here to get some feedback. But I agree, Amy, that it can and should be included as part of the contextual story. And we can say something to the effect of this happened, it was legal, and it was part of a culture and a context that supported extra legal lynchings. Yeah.
Yeah, as
See what Chris wrote, yeah.
yeah, it's the message crime, you know, as Sherilyn Eiffel calls it, you know, and the other, you know, experts who testified saying, yeah, I mean, lynching, this is a message crime. It's, you know, part of the intent is to send a clear message, you know, stay in your place.
Mhm.
You know, so I think that yeah, that's I think another aspect of this that sort of distinguishes it from, I don't want to say simple murder, but you know, from, you know, just sort of more generalized or garden variety, you know, forms of murder there. Um, wow. Wow, how we get to 1:30 already. No, this again, just a great conversation, you know. So I don't know, do folks have other thoughts or ideas that they want to share for, you know, yeah, Chris, go ahead.
Hi, let me see. It was so dark in my office, so I didn't have the light on. Every time the light turns on and it turns off, and I have to go through gyrations to get the lights on. Yeah, I just along the lines of what I've been thinking about with the Edna Broughton case is that it was an accident one way or another. Even if the people were even if Mrs. Nelson and her husband were outraged and they were trying to join the mob to find the alleged perpetrator, it was an accident. And then she made the effort, however well-intentioned it was, to leave her contact information so that the Daisy May could be taken to the hospital. I mean, nobody does that if they're trying to kill somebody. They don't go and check on, oh, take him to the hospital. They just don't do that. Nobody did that with any of the other victims. Now, what I'm thinking here is that, and again, to parse terms, is that I would not consider Edna Broughton to be a lynching victim. I would consider her to be a victim of lynching, which is to say, it's almost like collateral damage. With the atmosphere, the sense of it, that she is someone who ended up being a victim of a lynching mentality in what happened. But I would not put her up as far as one of the other 38 because of that specificity of how she met her end. But I've already instructed my staff to look further into it, and we will include her as a associated individual, which will be a case study that we will create for her, which we have done for some others too.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, you know, the unknown person who was killed, you know, by the mob, you know, around the Matthew Williams lynching. I mean,
Mhm.
yeah, it was pretty clear that, you know, the mob got to him, but this is, yeah, as you said, sort of collateral damage. Um, and again, sort of just going back over those criteria again, that fourth one, you know, sort of done in the name of, you know, the race, justice, tradition, or whatever. I don't think that would necessarily meet that criterion. So yeah, but again, I think, you know, it's important to have that conversation. Okay, other thoughts, or, you know, and again, I want to be mindful of folks' time.
Like Michelle, maybe trying to say
Yeah,
something.
go ahead.
Yeah, I just had one thought. I know to set up this meeting, you had asked about takeaways from the hearing. And one takeaway that stuck with me is how when we invited our witnesses, we invited them because of their subject matter expertise. And it didn't even cross my mind how many of them would have a personal connection to lynching in their family, which speaks to the ubiquity of
Mhm.
lynching. And even if you want to say, quote, only 38 people or 44, or whatever the actual number is, because I think everyone who spoke gave a different number of lynching victims in Maryland, but we say 38. So even if it was only 38, you have to consider, and I think the report has to make the point of how far-reaching the impact of those 38 murders were, because of how it reverberated. We talk about it being a message crime, how it reverberated in those towns, in those communities, down those family lines. It was, I think, every single Black witness had a story about a lynching in their family or in the town their family fled from. And I just thought that was mind blowing, because we didn't know that at all when we invited the people that we invited.
Wow. No, I remember a colleague of mine at Bowie, she said that, it's like if you talk to Black folk, eventually you'll probably find a story of lynching or some sort of, violence, in there. Again, just looking at my own family on mom's side, because mom, her father was from Baltimore, but, his grandfather moved the family from Frederick to Baltimore. And I just often, now wonder what was happening in Frederick at that time, that might have pushed them to move to Baltimore. Yeah, it's just one of those uncomfortable questions. Mom hasn't really had anything to say about that. I'll keep pushing, but yeah, I'm just kind of curious. And again, I think as you said, I mean, the ubiquity of it. Because when you think about it, it's like, again, if we take EJI's numbers, we're talking over 6,000 of these, and again, I mean, in the grand scheme, it's a small place, it's like those kinds of numbers, that's gonna hit a lot of people. Alrighty, well, I want to be mindful of time and thank you all for coming and for sharing and again, for doing this work and starting to process everything that happened last weekend. I mean, as I said, this is going to be an ongoing project. So we will meet up again. Well, hopefully we'll see y'all on Monday for the main commission meeting. And we'll keep it going. So have a wonderful weekend and hopefully we'll see you on Monday.
Great.
Have a
Yeah.
good weekend, everyone. Thanks
See you then.
again.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so